Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this August 5, 2014 edition of Nightcast. There is some good news. You really have to consider it good news out of Israel tonight. We'll have those stories upcoming. For our opening story tonight, there's some tragic news of a very embarrassing, a very humbling kind for the United States. A United States Major General has been killed after an attack by an Afghan soldier at a British-run military academy near Kabul. The general is the highest-ranking U.S. military official to die in combat since the Vietnam War. 2 British soldiers were also injured in the attack, along with several Americans, a German general, and an Afghan general. David Loyne reports from Kabul.
Afghan officer cadets in training earlier this year. For this exercise, their weapons were loaded with blank rounds. But today, an Afghan soldier whose weapon was loaded with live rounds fired at a group of Afghan and international troops close to the academy. The Major General who died was the most senior US soldier to die in combat since the Vietnam War.
There are a number of casualties as a result of the shooting, perhaps up to 15, to include some Americans. Many were seriously wounded, others received only minor injuries. The assailant was killed. I can also confirm that among the casualties was an American general officer who was killed.
The Afghan commander of the academy, Brigadier General Ghulam Saki, was among those wounded. A few months ago, he told me proudly that his cadets were being trained exactly like cadets at the British Academy at Sandhurst. Making the Afghan Sandhurst work involves close mentoring by international instructors. And it means those soldiers live and work alongside Afghan soldiers, some of who are armed. The attack did not take place in the British Academy itself, but in another building in the huge Afghan Defence University that the British Officers Academy is part of. This incident is another reminder that Afghanistan remains a volatile and sometimes violent country, and its path to peace is a stony one. The Officers Academy will be Britain's only military contribution to Afghan security after combat operations end this year, but more insider attacks could raise questions about its future. David Loyne, BBC News, Kabul.
And friends, with news from Gaza tonight, and let me tell you, we have, I got news from one of our viewers last night of an outstanding report, video by Dennis Prager on understanding the crisis in the Middle East with Israel, Gaza, even beyond Gaza, and the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac, Jacob and Judah, and the tribes of Benjamin and the tribes of Levi that are in the Middle East, in the country of Israel. Excellent report tonight on how to understand that, and a report on explaining the problem, analysis on how to resolve the problem. Outstanding. We'll play that toward the end of tonight's program. First, though, we do have some news reports from today. And tomorrow, I think I'm going to see if I can get a license to play a video that appeared on YouTube, or get the young lady's permission, who spoke from inside Israel, who gave an outstanding viewpoint too. So we have some good things for you this week that will help you get a mental handle on things, especially as the young lady, I'm going to try to get a license to play her video tomorrow evening, reports that there's a lot of media bias. And friends, you do see that in some of the videos we play here that I'm very thankful to have licensing for, because we get a picture of what's going on, and I often comment on the bias. In fact, perhaps Some of you may even consider, oh, Steve, you're commenting too much. You're leaning too much on the one side to overcome their certain bias here and there. So I'll try to keep I ask God to guide and lead my words on this program, and I'll try to, with His help and guidance, I'll try to keep the right balance when I criticize some of the bias you hear in the reporting, and I will do that from time to time, or even oftentimes. But I will also play the reports, and I have options. I mean, there's often more than one reporter giving the same report. Now, I do listen to those, and I do pick the least biased of the reports, of the most objective. And sometimes a reporter, like there's one reporter tonight who does very good in the beginning of her report, and then she starts to go, almost like she's on over here in the right side of things, and then almost like she just totally jumps over the middle and goes over to a ditch off on the other side. Brrr. We will point that out. You'll probably notice and observe that yourself if I let her continue all the way with that. And just to make the point, I think I probably will. But let's go with this first report from Gaza, where a 72-hour humanitarian truce is holding, according to this report, in Gaza, halting 4 weeks of conflict that has claimed more than 1,900 lives. Israel and Gaza militants maintained fire up until the truce started at 8 o'clock this morning, local time, 5 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. James Robbins gives his opinion in this next video report on whether the ceasefire is a victory for Israeli tactics, and he looks at and gives his opine on the long-term chances of lasting peace. I'll comment on that too a little later. Here's James Robbins' report.
Israel's heavy armor is out of Gaza, for now at least. The military tweeted, "Mission accomplished." Prime Minister Netanyahu is apparently satisfied overwhelming firepower has destroyed most of Hamas' ability to fight.
We've depleted rocket capabilities. We've taken out all of the tunnels that we are aware of, over 32.
So will Israel stop here and refuse any concessions over Gaza now it feels it has suppressed Hamas? Many of Israel's returning soldiers are jubilant, but tonight the United States is keeping up the pressure not just to stop the fighting, but to start serious peace talks. America's Secretary of State told the BBC the truce should be a new beginning.
Now we hope this can hold, perhaps because Israel is drawing down and pulling people out and it's finished its tunnel work, there'll be a greater space here. What we want to do is support the Palestinians in their desire to improve their lives and to be able to open crossings and get food in and reconstruct and have greater freedom. But that has to come with a greater responsibility towards Israel, which means giving up rockets, moving into a different place.
If the worst of this Gaza conflict is over, is there really any sort of victory for either side? Israel sees as its victory removing the threat to Israelis from Hamas rockets and their new weapon, cross-border tunnels. But the cost to Israel has been growing international condemnation of the scale of Gazan civilian casualties. So what are the chances of a lasting peace and, far more ambitious, of an eventual final settlement between Israel and the Palestinians? Both sides are heading to Cairo to explore a longer-term peace. The main Palestinian demand remains the end of the blockade of the Gaza Strip, the opening of border crossings. But now that Israel's Prime Minister has achieved his aim to return quiet and security to the citizens of Israel, he seems in no mood to make concessions to Hamas. Although one veteran Palestinian negotiator is calling for compromise and much bigger ambition.
Let's get a final settlement and a real solution, and then you can talk about disarmament and you can talk about relations as neighbors and so on, rather than as occupier and occupied.
But a comprehensive final settlement looks more distant than ever. 4 weeks of shocking violence seem to have increased just the sort of bitterness, mistrust, even hatred, which in the past have always fueled the next outbreak of conflict. James Robbins, BBC News.
You know, the Palestinian leader in that, the woman said, hey, give us an advantage and then we'll negotiate with you. Sorry, it don't work that way, or shouldn't work that way anyway, in spite of what our so-called friends, you know, I'm speaking on behalf of Israel now, you know, our so-called friends from the United States are attempting to do and say. Our next report, friends, comes from Orla Gurin from Gaza. She reports on how Hamas is now viewed there. And she starts out, in my opinion, very good. But then there's a point where she's, as I mentioned earlier, we had a reporter who's going to start out on a fine spot on the road, and then all of a sudden she's going to jump clear over several lanes and wind up in the ditch on the other side. Here's, and you'll notice that yourself, I'm sure, but I'll probably try to stop the video at that point and make a comment. Here is Orla Gurin from Gaza.
Hamas showing off their homemade rockets, this one aimed at Tel Aviv. This new video features empty terrain, but they also fire rockets from within civilian areas. Their propaganda footage shows fighters armed for an attack, but they remain largely out of sight, some literally underground. Mohammed Shaban was one of their local commanders in Gaza. He was a sniper and naval commando. Israel killed him in an airstrike last month. His proud father, Abu Ahmed, was a commander before him and told me he's ready to sacrifice his other sons. He denies that Hamas is targeting Israeli civilians.
Civilians are safe. We target soldiers and military bases.
I've seen kindergartens and houses in Israel that have been hit by Hamas rockets. You are targeting civilians.
We can't control where our rockets land. That is a matter of fate. They have sirens and shelters. We have nowhere to be safe.
Friends, did you notice? Let me comment right there. Did you notice on the Palestinian speaker there that, first of all, he says we don't have them. You know, and then he admits that we do. You know, he speaks out of one side of his mouth until you say, "Hey, we've caught you," and then he said, yeah," and he makes an admission, but he tries to paint ice cream all over the top of it, so you don't notice that, you know, hey, there's something bad underneath here. You know, well, you just caught me, but you know. Miss Gurin, up to this point, she was on a right spot in the road, hitting things where they needed to be hit. But here we go. Rest of this report, she's about to jump over several lanes and into the ditch. You'll see what I mean. Watch the rest of this report.
People here are counting the cost of 4 weeks of bombardment. In some places, bodies are still being dug out of the rubble. Israel has been aiming to weaken Hamas militarily and to persuade Palestinians to turn against them. Have they succeeded, or has all of this death and destruction cemented support for Hamas? In Gaza's main food market, bustling after the ceasefire began, we found only support for the militants.
We are so proud of the Palestinian resistance that defends us. So I am positive that Hamas protects us from Israeli occupation.
But there was no protection for these young boys.
Now, this is where she jumps the track, going into an emotional thing, going back to an accident that occurred. Accidents do happen during war, and people are wise to get as far away from battleground as possible. Up to this point where she mentions the young kids that were killed on the beach several weeks ago, the question she asked and the revelation that came out of Palestinians, well, we used to be against Hamas until this thing comes along. Now, you know, now because we are filled full of hatred toward Israel for having come in and had to do what they had to do, the way Hamas put civilians in front of military weaponry and the like. You know, you saw the cartoon I showed a couple of nights ago. I hope you did. If you didn't, you go back to our archive 2 nights ago. Excellent cartoon that somebody put together. I found it on Facebook, showed it Monday night. And friends, just stand by. Dennis Prager has an outstanding report that was supported by a family foundation that was extremely well put together. I was so happy to see that last night. Very objectively done, and really addresses the situation there, which is not a simple situation, as the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is about to you know, friends, I tell you, the rest of this report is so biased. I don't want to hear some nasty comments from you later on, that I'm going to go ahead, and we're going to go ahead and go to John Kerry, which in some ways almost gets worse. It's kind of like, look, with what's just happened to embarrass the United States right now, and considering what we've been going over several nights in a row, and if this is your first night to tune in, and I know we do have some new viewers tonight. I just had lunch with Sam Smitherman in Vance near the Mercedes plant today. We spent the whole afternoon in lunch, and he showed me some of his contacts on Facebook and how they were appreciating our program. And some will be tuning in new tonight. Welcome to you. Thanks for the outstanding conversation and the time we spent together during lunch today, Sam. I appreciate that. That was wonderful. And friends, but I've been going several nights over Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, the blessings and cursing chapters of the Bible, as we've appropriately entitled or labeled those 2 chapters. They both start out with God saying that if you obey me, here are the blessings I will give you, both as individuals and as a nation, including blessings upon your agriculture, because God will give you plenty of rain, and protection from your enemies, where 100 of you, where 5 of you will chase away 100. 100 of you will chase away 10,000. And other blessings. I'll make you the head, not the tail, as a nation. I'll make you the lender, not the borrower. That one alone should make some eyes pop open, because you say, wait a minute, the United States borrows huge amounts of money and keeps raising its debt ceiling. It's a great borrower. It's not a great lender. It's a great borrower. It's in trouble, debt-wise, financially-wise, as a country. Yes, that's very true. By the way, friends, I can see that I need some help with either another piece of equipment or filtering on our lighting or whatever, because I can see that the coloring is not proper here. And I've tried some different lighting today. I can see it's not only not working, it's even making things a little bit worse. But we're constantly working to improve this program. And one of the comments that I get on this program often, which I appreciate very much, is that, hey, Steve, you keep continuing to improve with the program, the way you present it, the things you do, the quality of the slides and audio and what have you, and you're constantly making little improvements. Now that means, you know, when we started out, we maybe weren't so hot. We may still not be perfect, but thankfully we're not digressing or going backwards. Hey, you're getting worse and worse. You know, we are little by little getting better and better. Even in my own personal life, God is dealing with me, and I'm learning things. He's showing me some of my secret faults. I've asked him to do that, and wow, as he lifts the curtain on some of my secret faults, I'm saying, wow, how come you're still using me? I'm far, far, far from perfect. And, you know, listen, I hope I don't scare some of you away if, you know, I admit that, you know, but it's good if we can be honest with ourselves. And as God reveals things to us, and we should be asking him. You know, this is a program of news related to the Bible and prophecy. Sometimes we go into the Bible and bring out things that we need even in our own personal lives. And let me bring this home to where we were. You know, in the blessings and cursing chapters, I mentioned some of the things God mentions there are blessings to you as an individual, where If you obey as an individual, you get promises, things from God that work in your individual life. You got fruit trees in your backyard, God might bring you rain when the rest of the neighborhood gets none. And that kind of thing can happen. God very much keeps his word. You obey, you get blessings. He says, on the other hand, you don't obey, you get just the opposite. Instead of being the lender and not the borrower, he says you will be the borrower and not the lender, which is the condition of the United States. That alone right there should tell you, hey, according to God's word, the United States is under a curse, according to Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28. It's under a biblical curse from the great Creator God who keeps his word. And he then goes on and says, even after I do the curses to try to wake you up, to help you turn around, because if you repent as Nineveh did, even though I told Jonah to go tell Nineveh they were going to be destroyed, Jonah already knew me, the great God, what the great God knows and says. Jonah knew me enough to know that if Nineveh repents at his preaching to them, and he suspected they might, then they repent, I repent of the evil that I had planned to do to them. That's according to God's own word. And when Nineveh put on sackcloth and ashes and fasted and prostrated themselves before God and begged for his mercy, God extended his mercy. He forgave them, and he did not destroy Nineveh. Jonah was very upset. He wanted to see them destroyed for their many past iniquities. But they repented. God repented of the evil he had planned to do to them. Same with the United States. Friends, with the curses that we are under now, if we repented and obeyed God, we'd have his blessing. He says, if you don't, though, when I begin to do the curses, then I'll punish you 7 times more. That's in verse 18 of Leviticus 26. And then in verse 19, he goes on to say, and if you're still not repenting after I've punished you 7 times more, then, let me read those 2 verses direct. Verse 18, and if you will not yet for all this, after the curses, he says where I turn everything around the other way on you if you are disobeying me, if you will not yet for all this hearken unto me, then I will punish you 7 times more for your sins. And then here's the bottom line, verse 19, and I will break the pride of your power. Now, the United States is under a curse right now. Its power the pride of its power being dashed, as we see in California, more Hispanics than the tribe of the descendants of Israel, of Manasseh. And we're seeing the rest of the country begin to be overwhelmed with, you can't call them immigrants because immigrants are legal inside the country. You've got to call these illegal immigrants, just thrashing into the country, and the president wobbling on getting them right out of here, instead supporting them and trying to put them here and there and letting them just be filtered into the country here and there. And next thing you know, they're news stories. I'll try to bring you some later this week or next week that ask the questions, what do you do when America's no longer the people God blessed, the descendants of Israel? And I'm talking about Israel, whose name was changed to Israel from Jacob, who had 12 sons, one of whom was Joseph, who had 2 sons who took Joseph's name, Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh being the United States today, and the United Kingdom being the modern tribe today of Ephraim, the 2 sons of Joseph, Ephraim, Manasseh. So here you got United States Secretary of State trying to engineer things in Israel, when, look, Israel went in and took care of the tunnels, took care of the weapons. Sure, the United States supported them with some finances, but the United States didn't support them with any boots or help. In fact, interfered by causing the situation to be too much. Let's still try to help these people become a nation, a state that can trouble Israel. Stay home, Mr. Kerry. Just stay home, will you? trying to straighten out the things inside the United States and try to deal with a situation like the great embarrassment that just happened in Afghan. But let's look at the story from the day, friends. United States Secretary of State John Kerry says it is important to make life better for Palestinians. You know, look, life will get better. Israel pulled out and said, hey, we're going to, you know, we're not out to destroy you. We're just was out to protect the citizens of Israel and to get rid of those weapons and tunnels. Now, we've made that objective. We feel like we've made that objective. We're pulling out. Right now would be a time just to be quiet, leave things alone, let the people settle for themselves, let them be angry with Hamas. But no, John Kerry's got a United States, embarrassed as the United States should be because of the humbling that is occurring to the United States, because being the world's biggest borrower, not a lender anymore, since a long time ago, we're under a curse from God. We should be working on our problems at home and be quiet with these other things and not stir up trouble the way by excess talk you stir up trouble. You show that you're really on the side of the enemy of Israel who wants to destroy Israel. John Prager tonight's going to have an outstanding, or Dennis Prager, which one? What's the first name? Well, I beg your pardon. We'll get to that story in a moment. That's coming up real soon. And we're going a little over tonight because that's an important video I do want to share with you. And friends, I felt it important because of the bias, even that is happening with the United States government, with their interfering in that situation over there to just stir it up even worse than it is. So here he is, John Kerry over there, stressing that it will require for peace. Look, if you just go away and leave things alone, there'd be peace for a little while. And Israel would make sure there's peace, because anytime there's not, they'll go over there and knock the guys out. But no, you got to stir it up, help stir up the emotions, and stress things like it'll require compromise on both sides, the blah, 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 blah. Now, John Kerry in this video is speaking to BBC's Hard Talk, where he calls for a bigger, broader approach to the underlying issues of two states. They keep thumping that thing that will not work. He recognized, and just this is a time to be quiet. Both sides have lost a lot of lives. Just be quiet. Go home. Leave this alone. But he didn't, and so you should know about it, friends. John Kerry. Well, I'm not going to comment any more about it. Let's just go into this. Let me let you see this video where John Kerry is appearing on the BBC's Hard Talk. We got just a small excerpt from it. Then we'll be getting into just one other video. No, then we'll go right into the video with Mr. Prager on the Middle East problem. Here's John Kerry first.
We clearly back, as part of an overall solution, there has to be a giving on both sides with respect to these issues. Obviously, you have to begin to make life better for the Palestinians. We made that very, very clear in the ceasefire announcement that we had a few days ago. It didn't hold, unfortunately. Now we hope this can hold, perhaps because Israel is drawing down and pulling people out and it's finished its tunnel work. There'll be a greater space here.
So
what we want to do is support the Palestinians in their desire to improve their lives and to be able to open crossings and get food in and reconstruct and have greater freedom. But that has to come with a greater responsibility towards Israel, which means giving up rockets, moving into a different place. Now, where will that finally come together? It'll finally come together when you have a bigger, broader approach to the solution of the underlying issues of two states, of people who will be able to have rights protected because they will be respected in the context of those two states, which have security for Israel, guarantees for a better life, and for greater freedoms for the Palestinians. But that's the formula.
All right, friends, without further comment, let's go now to Mr. Prager's outstanding report on explaining the Middle East problem.
When I did my graduate studies at the Middle East Institute at Columbia University's School of International Affairs, I took many courses on the question of the Middle East conflict. Semester after semester, we studied the Middle East conflict as if it was the most complex conflict in the world, when in fact, it is probably the easiest conflict in the world to explain. It may be the hardest to solve, but it is the easiest to explain. In a nutshell, it's this. One side wants the other side dead. Israel wants to exist as a Jewish state and to live in peace. Israel also recognizes the right of Palestinians to have their own state and to live in peace. The problem, however, is that most Palestinians and many other Muslims and Arabs do not recognize the right of the Jewish state of Israel to exist. This has been true since 1947, when the United Nations voted to divide the land called Palestine into a Jewish state and an Arab state. The Jews accepted the United Nations partition, but no Arab or any other Muslim country accepted it. When British rule ended on May 15, 1948, the armies of all the neighboring Arab states, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Transjordan, and Egypt, attacked the one-day-old state of Israel in order to destroy it. But to the world's surprise, the little Jewish state survived. Then it happened again. In 1967, the dictator of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, announced his plan, in his words, to destroy Israel. He placed Egyptian troops on Israel's border, and armies of surrounding Arab countries were also mobilized to attack. However, Israel preemptively attacked Egypt and Syria. Israel did not attack Jordan and begged Jordan's king not to join the war. But he did. And only because of that did Israel take control of Jordanian land, specifically the West Bank of the Jordan River. Shortly after the war, the Arab states went to Khartoum, Sudan, and announced their famous three no's: no recognition, no peace, and no negotiations. What was Israel supposed to do? Well, one thing Israel did a little more than a decade later in 1978 was to give the entire Sinai Peninsula, an area of land bigger than Israel itself and with oil, back to Egypt, because Egypt, under new leadership, signed a peace agreement with Israel. So Israel gave land for the promise of peace with Egypt, and it has always been willing to do the same thing with the Palestinians. All the Palestinians have ever had to do is recognize Israel as a Jewish state and promise to live in peace with it. But when Israel has proposed trading land for peace, as it did in 2000, when it agreed to give the Palestinians a sovereign state in more than 95% of the West Bank and all of Gaza, the Palestinian leadership rejected the offer and instead responded by sending waves of suicide terrorists into Israel. Meanwhile, Palestinian radio, television, and school curricula remain filled with glorification of terrorists, demonization of Jews, and the daily repeated message that Israel should cease to exist. So it's not hard to explain the Middle East dispute. One side wants the other dead. The motto of Hamas, the Palestinian rulers of Gaza, is, "We love death as much as the Jews love life." There are 22 Arab states in the world, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean. There is one Jewish state in the world, and it is about the size of New Jersey. In fact, tiny El Salvador is larger than Israel. Finally, think about these two questions. If tomorrow Israel laid down its arms and announced, "We will fight no more," what would happen? And if the Arab countries around Israel laid down their arms and announced, "We will fight no more," what would happen? In the first case, there would be an immediate destruction of the state of Israel and mass murder of its Jewish population. In the second case, there would be peace the next day. As I said at the outset, it is a simple problem to describe. One side wants the other dead. And if it didn't, there would be peace. Please remember this. There has never been a state in the geographic area known as Palestine that was not Jewish. Israel is the third Jewish state to exist in that area. There was never an Arab state, never a Palestinian state, never a Muslim or any other state. That's the issue. Why can't the one Jewish state the size of El Salvador be allowed to exist? That is the Middle East problem. I'm Dennis Prager.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis Prager. And friends, I need to give a credit before we sign off tonight. This course that Dennis Prager just gave was made possible with a grant from Adam and Gila Milstein Family Foundation. Thanks for joining us tonight, friends. That's it for this Tuesday night edition of Nightcast. God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Wednesday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.